Nightline was there in 2011. So were the Duggars.
Long time no see.
At the time, the eldest Duggar child, Josh, had been married for 3 years.
There's many different definitions of courtship, but for us, it meant really choosing purity, choosing to wait for a lot of things that people would take for granted. So our first kiss was on our wedding day.
Just 4 years later, Josh acknowledged he molested 5 girls when he was just 14, including 4 of his sisters. Jill says she told authorities about the abuse. Josh never faced charges. 19 Kids and Counting, the show that made the family a fortune, was canceled after the shocking headlines came to light. Tasked with damage control, Jill says she and her sister Jessa felt they had to give an interview to Fox News to protect the family brand.
It was like, okay, we need you to fall in line here and do these interviews for the show, go here, do this thing and that thing to kind of rally the troops and get it back together.
Jess and I were talking, we're like, oh my goodness, most of the stuff out there is lies, it's not truth. And so for truth's sake, we want to come out and set the record straight.
I was surprised to read that Josh was in the room.
Yeah.
Off camera.
Yeah.
What do you see in that 24-year-old girl who's talking?
I didn't want to be there. I wanted to help my parents, and I felt like I was the only one who could do this. I was the only one who could fill that role.
Everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I am Jen, and this is Fundy Fridays. And here on my channel, I talk about different aspects of Christian fundamentalism, American conservative politics, pop culture, and gay stuff. And since about June, I've been a fucking Duggar channel, apparently. So today we are going to be talking about Jill Duggar, aka Jill Dillard's new book. While not explicitly a tell-all, there are some pretty bombshell accusations and revelations in this thing. It's fucking crazy. I read it in 3 hours, and then I've been making all kinds of content about it. So, yeah, we definitely need to talk about this book. But before we begin, you'll have to excuse my stuffy nose. This just came over me, this morning. I'm, congested, and you'll have to, put up with my sniffles. Excuse me. And, of course, I am wearing the Fundy Fridays tarot shirt, which was made by the wonderful Lauren Marvell. It is a part of a new series of merch that I just put out. There's also stickers, of course, of this design, and she also made Vampire Hoe, which I am so just incredibly proud of, and that is a reference to something that Sister Cindy says. It's also just really funny and cute, and then, of course, we have the Eyes of Reverend Jen and the Jesus 12 Followers plaque, and that is made by Max Holler, and all of these are available on my... Also, and if you don't want to buy anything to support the channel, remember you can always share, subscribe, thumbs up, all that good stuff. And if you are a patron or a YouTube channel member, there is behind the scenes videos. We're actually doing a live stream for those people this Sunday. Probably if I was a patron, the thing I would be most excited about is the Discord server, because we have been doing Sister Wives watch parties on Mondays. We've been watching the last week's episode on Monday, and that's been really fun, and it's just a wonderful community because everybody's nice there. So I do appreciate that. And if you haven't already, check out some of my earlier work. This month, we collabed with Jordan and McKay to talk about the Ruby Franke arrest. I'm sure we're going to collab with them again once more of the story develops. Hey guys, it's me from the editing chair, and my cough and congestion got a million times worse. But I just wanted to say that I had a whole section here, and I ended up not liking it, so I took it out, and therefore there is no good transition from the Ruby Franke thing to the Jill thing. So here you go. This is me transitioning from one topic to another. I think Jill is probably my favorite Duggar, but she is not perfect. She's not without sin like the rest of us. Most of the time, this is a really good book. She's very vulnerable in it, and she talks about a lot of trauma that she went through. And most importantly, she holds Jim Bob accountable for his various wrongdoings. And she does also call out Josh in this book, which is very much appreciated. But you have to remember, this is her family. She's a real person. Her sexual abuse was laid out for everyone to read about in a very public way, and she has had to be re-victimized several times since the initial event occurred. So try to keep that in mind. Derrick obviously has made some very transphobic comments. I don't think he's ever apologized or like shown change, but I do think he's a really good husband. So, hey, two things can be true at once. So let's dive into this book. I am very excited to talk about it with you, and would love to hear your comments below. Because this is pretty wild. This is the kind of thing we've been waiting for a long time. It's also very much like allowing us as the viewers and as the fans or the readers or however you want to describe us, letting us into her world in such a intimate way is such a privilege, and I'm so grateful that she has shared the story with us, because I do think it's going to help a lot of people. Let's begin. Okay, so this is the cover. This was announced, I think, like, right when Shiny Happy People came out. I don't believe that anybody knew that she was writing a book, so congrats to her for keeping that a secret. She does have, I called it a ghostwriter in my TikTok, but it's not. He's a credited writer that helped put these things together. That is Craig Borlace. So I can hear Jill's voice in this. I don't think she didn't write a word. I think she did collaborate with this man. I'm sure there was a lot of like just talking and him like converting it into, text, like maybe like an interview style. She gives him a big credit at the end of this. And it seems like she is getting legitimate therapy, because you can really hear it in how she talks about things and how she processes her traumas. You can really tell that she's been working with a professional on this situation. So, here we go. Let's see what I've highlighted. Oh, this was something interesting. I don't know a lot about Simon & Schuster, but I do know that it's a secular, like, regular publisher, and Ginger's book was published by a Christian publisher, which might explain the tone of hers. I thought this was a wonderful intro here to those who have been harmed in the name of religion, to those who have suffered behind closed doors and have yet to find their voice, to those who have begun to find their voice but may still be living in a season of isolation, to those who, like Esther of the Old Testament Bible story, have courageously answered the call for such a time as this. Esther 4:14, and despite the backlash, have now found their voice. From victims and survivors to strangers, family, and friends, this book is dedicated to you. May you all know that you are not alone, that your story, your voice, and your mental health matter. The Lord is a stronghold for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. Psalm 9:9. So, I have never read the Bible. I don't know if this verse does anything for anybody else, but if it does, that's awesome. There's a family tree in here. I really appreciated that she only put her own kids. There's another quote from Luke 14:28. For which of you intending to build a tower sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it? Counting the cost! This first opening section is about her sledding with Derrick. I'm pretty sure they were already engaged or about to be, and Michelle is like yelling at them, hey, no boys and girls sharing a sled. And she talks about how even when there's not cameras around, she just knows that she's being watched all the time. And that's hard to put on a performance like that every day of your life. She talks about bewilderment in people's eyes, cameramen, journalists, everyday strangers, people always gawking and staring at them, which I'm sure was a part of the indoctrination. Like, we're different, and this is how we live, and we need to be proud of it. When Derrick proposed to me and I made sure when I said yes, the film crew got the shot just how they wanted it. I couldn't see my life from the outside. Yeah, that's some real shit. Like, having to make sure that you get everything just right for the camera in your own personal, intimate moment. Like, I'm sure even not being allowed to have private conversations while you're courting is so, like, yeah, you're being watched. You can never truly be yourself. And I know a lot of people, have their proposals filmed. Mine was, but it was my best friend. But I told James under no circumstances was he to propose in public because I couldn't handle the pressure. But yeah, imagine the pressure of all those people there, and like 20 dudes just standing around with boom mics. This is chapters called Sweet Jilly Muffin. That's her childhood nickname, and it's kind of like this character that like her family thinks she is. Like, Sweet Jilly Muffin always obeys her parents. Sweet Jilly Muffin always goes along to get along and will do anything to help the family and save the show. Sweet Jilly Muffin is this little girl that is subjugated by Jim Bob, and when she grew up to be Jill, it just was different. Those ideas clashed. They're talking about music and how it was very vital to their upbringing, but like gospel music, hymns, no contemporary Christian music. And she's talking about how they're not allowed to dance because it makes you sway your body, and then men will look at the parts that you're swaying, and it's like just very disturbing because we're talking about little tiny baby children. People aren't looking at that, but most people, when they see a baby dancing, they think it's super cute, and then maybe they dance along. But for the Duggars, it was a very upsetting situation. They talked about how they would be allowed to jump for joy, but even the jumping could get them in trouble. So here's some classic photos of the family. Look how young everybody is in this. This is just ridiculous. Yes, that's baby Jill, Jana, John David, and Josh. And then, young Michelle and Jim Bob just kills me. Jill talks about how she tried to get her affection and attention from being like perfect and obedient. She enjoyed being compared to Michelle, and she just tried to be the best, most obedient child. And on this page, she talks about the buddy system and how it started. She particularly says that she liked it. She liked playing mom. She does that a lot in this book. She will talk about something that clearly on the outside is parentification. But she is like justifying it. Oh, it was fun. And that can be true. She probably did enjoy taking care of her younger siblings. That doesn't mean that it should have been her responsibility. Because we know that the Duggars would literally put infant babies in with their older siblings, their older sisters, to take care of. A 12-year-old should not be getting up in the middle of the night to prepare a bottle or change a baby, and I don't want to say that I don't want to invalidate her lived experience. I'm just saying I don't see it that way. But that's nice that she can recontextualize that into a good memory. I guess I'd rather her have a good memory than a shitty one. She's talking about how she didn't see her parents as overbearing. Instead, she saw them as loving and caring. Talking about immodesty. Obviously, that was a huge deal to them. The first time they went to the beach and the first time she saw somebody in a bikini, and how that just kind of like blew her mind. In my head, it's, the start of the cognitive dissonance, but it was really just like shocking to them how different they were than everybody else. And also, they were wearing prairie dresses or equivalent in the ocean, and that is a safety hazard. Here's a picture of what they wore to the beach. She's talking here about how they were barely allowed to go see their friends, and even then, they had to role play what they would do in certain situations. Now, what if somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, Joseph, why don't you read this book right here? It's got a witch in it." Which is funny, but also sad. Joseph would deliver his line right on cue. "I'm a Christian. I'm not able to do that." "That's good, Joseph. And what about you, Ginger? What would you say if someone asked you to watch a movie with them? The kind with people who are immodestly dressed." And of course, they'd say, "I'm a Christian, I'm not able to do that," which is an interesting thing. She also talks a lot in this book about how the parents went out of the way to be like, now we live differently, but we don't shame others, which I have a very hard time believing that there was no shaming of others going on, just as much as they were shaming their own children. That kind of thing trickles down. And then she said, all of the children would have to reply something like, "Others may, we may not," which is just like so... Ugh. And of course, she says Jim Bob would like to talk about it differently. He would give different explanations. You got the world over here, and then you got Christianity over here. There's a line between them. Do you want to get right up next to that line? Yeah. She has some like really cute like childhood memories. That kids would form different clubs, which is like kind of funny because like there's so many. Of course, they joined little clubs. One of them was Jana's club in her shed where they would have ice cream at the end of the meeting. And then she talked about Josh's club boycott, which they talked about in Shiny Happy People, which was their whole thing was they were going to protest and hand out tracts and try to convince people not to go to this gas station that sold pornography. I don't know if they had like a real protest with like pickets and news and everything, but we know they handed out tracts and they raised money. They had $20, whatever, but it was boys only. And Jill was able to buy her way into the club by giving Josh $2. So, you know, there's a price for everybody. And then, of course, he would make homemade pickles, and they would eat them at the end of their meeting. So that's good to know. Jill talks a lot about finding comfort in, you know, the rules and the do's and do nots of both Gothardism and the KJV version of the Bible. She liked having the structure and the rules and stuff, and that's why a lot of people liked them. But she also talks about going to IBLP conferences in Knoxville, Tennessee, and she brings up the reversal babies, which James brought up to me, and he had never heard of this, but I knew about it from like Free Ginger. Yeah, so there was a movement within a lot of Quiverful spaces of men who had had vasectomies, and then they would have a change of heart, or they would come to know Jesus or whatever, and then they would get a reversal, and then they'd have more babies, and they were known as reversal babies. And they even had a choir full of these children that were supposedly reversal babies. And I asked the group chat that I'm in with a bunch of IBLP survivors, and they said, yeah, that was totally a thing. And even some people would lie about how they were conceived so they could be in this reversal choir. And I just thought that is so, like, everybody has their own little subcultures, and even within those there's these different like pressures and rules and like things that you have to do, and I just thought that was wild. She also talked about model families, which were exactly what they're called. Like, they were families that were propped up to be like role models for the rest of the IBLP crowd. And so these would be families with lots of kids. They all played instruments. They were perfectly groomed. They were obedient. And one of them actually came up with the recipe for tater tot casserole she talks about. And so that's where that came from. But yeah, these were big deal. And this section talks about, you know, where the term Nike came from, which is, you know, shoes are Nike. So you look down at your shoes when somebody's dressed immodestly. And that came about because the boys were like freaking out about an immodestly dressed person. And they would like be like, don't look over there. And so that became too much, so they came up with this code. And they all talked about the different sins, including lying, stealing, disobeying your parents, which comes up a lot in this book, and being a tattletale, which my parents called stirring up contention among the brethren. And that is brought up a lot in this book too. Anytime somebody wants to like speak their mind or be a person with rights, Jim Bob will be like, don't stir up any contention. Like, you are the source of much contention. Pops raised the issue with us well, explaining that even though we all have bad thoughts at times, what mattered was how we dealt with them. You have a choice, but how you deal with those thoughts. A thought becomes a sin when you dwell on it. Yeah, that's definitely not going to fuck with a lot of people. It's definitely not going to be... Yeah, that's not true, by the way. If you dwell on something, that doesn't mean that you believe that, think that, or that it's true, by the way. Oh, yeah. So this part, they talk about going to a regular church when they were little, but then they put on like a play with dancing, and so that was like too much for them. And so Jim Bob pulled them out, and they start going to home church. And then the very tail end of this chapter is a little hint about Josh. It doesn't say what he did, nor what I want it to, but Jill alludes to it very clearly in this book. And she doesn't want to talk about it, nor should she have to. And, yeah, she alludes to it, and you know what's going on. We don't really need to dwell on it. But she talks about Josh confessing to the parents the first time and then being sent away. And then that happened literally right around the time of the magazine that featured the Duggars. And that was right around the time of 14 Kids and Pregnant Again. She says it wasn't that they weren't allowed to talk about it. It was just uncomfortable and nobody wanted to, which I've been in situations like that before, where it's like not against the rules, but like, you really don't want to bark up that tree. Yeah, he was sent away. We all know that it was just some bullshit IBLP thing. It wasn't a real rehab or anything. She said that Jim Bob kept calling the show a window of opportunity, and then eventually that morphed into It's Our Ministry. But the kids were super uncomfortable, at least Jill was. She hated being on camera. She hated being perceived. Same. And she just didn't like the feeling. Talks about the magazine shoot, learning about how to act around the cameras, and then this part, from the first special, TLC was paying for their groceries, which is not a bad thing. I want these kids to eat, and food insecurity is a big deal, and there are millions of people that go hungry every day. I'm not shaming them for that. I'm saying that TLC never showed us the real Duggars anyway. If they were showing the real Duggars, they would have shown, how they were actually struggling. And so they started paying for the bills, which kind of started this like codependent relationship between the Duggars and TLC, because now they were finally eating good. Then she talks about how they started building the house, the tater tot house, and how they were going to fully build it themselves, except for TLC wanted it to be done so that they could include that in the special. They wanted to have a nice look, it's all done and shiny and nice, and so they actually footed the bill and called in their own contractors to help speed along. Later in the book, Jill talks about how it was actually really fun to build the house and how they weren't taking advantage of her, and, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I'm sure she did have fun, and I'm sure it was nice to educate these kids and show them how to use power tools and how to build something. But to make it their responsibility, like, a child should not have to, like, put up drywall, And it's okay for them to come to help their parents with a project, but yeah, it should not be fully up to them. I also don't know how safe they were being. And Bob says, they decided to do the show as long as they don't edit out their faith and they don't make them look stupid, which is, they kind of did a little bit, but whatever. Homeschooling was often interrupted so that we could get out of the house and film something. Yeah, I'm sure their homeschool was great. Pops is what Jill calls Jim Bob. He gave the older kids a debit card so that they could feed themselves while they were out running errands, and she said, "This is a lot better than how it used to be, with us driving around with a crock pot full of chili, feeding little ones on the run." Painting a very bad picture here. She talks about this unaired visit from Bill Gothard and the IBLP Romania squad, which, that's its own rabbit hole. And also she calls Bill Gothard short. He is not a short king. That's James. Oh, and she said that Jana was one of Gothard's girls. I'm not going to speculate what happened with Jana. I hope she was a lovely secretary, and that's it. That's what I hope happened. Here she talks about she organized a water balloon fight with some IBLP kids, and they were having a good time until this dad comes out and starts screaming at her, and then she runs and hides. Yeah, because she's probably used to being screamed at. Then, this is all in the same page, by the way. Well, 2 pages together, but we got the actual origin story of the letter that got the Duggars investigated. She says it was Josh's ex-girlfriend. Fill in the blanks. We all know who that is. And she wrote a letter about the abuse that Josh did to his sisters. I have no idea if this was ever meant to be seen, if this was like a diary entry, if she had just been hoping that somebody would find it, if it was just like, let me write this and put this into the world and we'll see what God does. No idea. But we do know what happened, which was she wrote this letter, put it in a book, maybe as a bookmark. Somebody borrowed the book. Then they reported Jim Bob and Michelle. And then they ended up having to fill out a police report. All of the children were interviewed with very graphic details because they thought that they were, safe, and they were telling this to somebody they could trust. And that resurfaced in 2015 when In Touch, I don't know how, I think they did FOIA, which is Freedom of Information Act, and so they asked the police department for this report, and then they published it. So Jill and her sisters ended up suing, not just In Touch, but like a bunch of different people, and she name drops them, and she always name drops the same people of who they sued about this. And the judge dismissed the case, but he did say that it was wrong for them to share this information, that children should be protected. I can't remember what the exact thing, that was the reason why they couldn't sue, but yeah, very interesting, because no, I don't think any of them deserve to have that information out. I don't know if that would have ever affected, Josh being arrested later in his life. I don't know, what life would have looked like if this had never come out, and I'm not going to say that like it's a good thing or a bad thing. But it happened, and Jill and her sisters were re-victimized because of this. I can't change that it is now. I regret reading it now that I know how upset it made all of the girls, but I did read it back in 2015. So sorry, Jill. I get it. Like, yeah, people were curious. They wanted to know. They wanted to see justice for these girls. A lot of people have been hurt in similar ways, and they were kind of like seeing how this played out and how it reflected their own situation. That's why I think a lot of people were doing this. It's like a lot of people come after the Duggars, not just because they don't like Christians, which is what a lot of them think. It's because they have been raised in similar environments. They've gone through similar high control groups. They've had people abuse them, and it gets swept under the rug or been told that, it's their own fault or whatever. And so people are they want to help, or maybe they think that by telling Jill these things that it will help change her mind. I think that's what I'm doing a little bit, but yeah, it's a really hard situation, but somebody found this letter and took action, which I am glad that they did, because if the Duggars had their way, they would have just sent Josh off to build a house and never talked about it again. But he needed to face some consequences, and he did 20 years later. Then she brings up they were in Chicago to record with Oprah. That's a pivotal part of the story. And of course that episode never aired. So I wonder if it's somewhere. I wonder a lot if like in 100 years or something, we're going to finally get to see all this hidden footage and lost episodes, not just of Duggars, but of like everything, every show, But anyways, yeah, she was super scared that she was going to get taken away. That's a very valid fear. And so, yeah, she said everybody knew this was an open secret. But she also believed that people were mad, that they were Christians, that they were jealous of the show. That's probably not true. I'm sure like one person was jealous, but most of them were just trying to look out for you because they knew how fucked up this was. And I'm sure they've been through similar, and they wanted to help you because your parents weren't helping. I know Jim Bob and Michelle, and everyone's going to say they did their best. I think they definitely could have done more. Jill also said that she did go to counseling when this happened originally. I just hope that it really gave her some closure. This picture right here just shows how many damn people are actually in these shots. So for like every little scene that's supposed to be like cute and quaint, you've got 7 dudes. Looks like there's another person. Maybe that's a chair leg, but that's a lot to think about. And I think about like my own show, which is just me and this damn camera. But she said that the pressure was awful. She felt super anxious. It was super invasive. And it is labor. They were child actors, essentially, not getting paid. And she said, it got to the point where I was feeling the stress nearly every time they were filming. Either I was trying to bury my discomfort and anxiety when they sprung a surprise on us, or fake my joy when we were filming something we already rehearsed. I had to keep my reality far away from the TV. She says they weren't really allowed to have unrestricted internet access, and Jim Bob said, don't listen to any of these people anyway. They don't know us. They're jealous. They're haters. She believed, ministry comes with hardships, and to be a Christian is to be persecuted. She said, Jim Bob and Bill Gothard were becoming buddies, and he would consult Jim Bob on stuff, and it was weird. I think it just gets twisted because you're supposed to, give your daughter away to her husband. And she says in the book, she's like, that was a lie. She's like, I was never given away. I still had to listen to Jim Bob. Regardless of how you feel about giving somebody away to somebody else, people cannot be owned. They are not property. She means metaphorically. And it's true. Like, Jim Bob still controlled her and all of the other adult children. And you see that later in the book, just how much control he has over them. And he financially abuses them. He holds that over their head. Every nice thing he ever does when he's mad, he's like, well, you got to pay me for that now. They didn't ask to be born. And that's your responsibility to take care of them. You don't have to, fund every little thing, but you can't feed your children and then bill them for it. If you know about Sin in the Camp, we're not really sure what it was, but it was like something Josh looked at porn on the computer at the Capitol, is what I thought it was. And she says that Josh was looking at porn on the phone of somebody he had been working with, so somebody in the Capitol, one of these politicians. I think I know who it was, but I'm not going to say. But watch James's episode called The Tale of Two Jims, because that will tell you all about the Holtz and that situation. She said people had been trying to talk to Jim Bob about the ministry and how it was kind of bullshit, and he was not having it. Not allowed to talk about guys. It can only be orchestrated by the parents or the man. Their book about courtship. Jim Bob setting her and Derrick up in like this really overt way and always putting him on speaker and be like, come in, Jill. Why don't you come talk to my friend Derrick here? And like, you know, I'm glad they ended up liking each other and they're married, of course. But it just gives me the ick anytime a father tries to be involved like that, especially in their culture. I remember watching the episode where she meets Derrick in Nepal, and she says, like, it wasn't like that on the show. Like, they actually hung out for 2 weeks, but they had to film a fake goodbye, and she just knew there was a lot of pressure. She said, if he asked me to court, or if we end up courting and we break up, can you please not show it? And the producers are like, I'm gonna show it. What are you talking about?
Gotta figure out how to make money on this. I really want to.
No room for spontaneity. No contact between courtship people. She said she hated when she was getting her wisdom teeth out and they put that on TV. Oh, and she was talking all about the different births and how they were filmed. She says Michelle won't let them film births, but we got Anna to do it. And she even said, she's like, I don't want to be like Anna where they show like all this like footage that I don't want. And like, it's just like, God, they really didn't care about these people. They just wanted TV. Here's her meeting Derrick. Super cute. I remember watching this on TV. Derrick was a missionary in Nepal. And I don't think he needed to be there. And also, it was like the tail end of his time there. Like, they could have waited a few months. Derrick's mom had cancer. She's now cancer-free and doing well. But at the time, it was very, very, very close. She almost died several times. And there was definitely a version of events where she left this earth. She said there was just so many little things, like she wanted to have like a wedding hashtag, which were really popular back then, and they were like, no, we can't have any pictures or videos of this wedding out. It has to be, you know, first exclusive look goes to people, you know this. And Derrick's super sweet. I mean, to Jill, you know, he's like, this isn't something we need to, you know, worry about. Let's focus on getting married. Jill also made sure they did not film her honeymoon because she just, like, yeah, I'd be fucking sick of these people in my face, too, after so many years of being on TV. Aha, so here you go. Let's see, page 274. She starts bringing up Chad for the first time, which is Jim Bob's PR guy. He's his fixer. He's his everything. He's the wind beneath his wings. But he started off, you know, innocuous, but then it became, yeah, a monster. Around this time, Jim Bob starts really getting crazy with the luxuries. He has several planes. He's, you know, new ATVs, new cars, paying for rent, all the different kids, and then holding it over their head. Lavish gifts, political donations, you know. And then here it is. Here's the contract they were tricked into signing, and I do believe that. He said, sure, come sign this, but Derrick is very insistent. Jill is insistent. They would never have signed this insane contract if they had known what it was. So he's saying, like, it doesn't count. Which I also think it doesn't count because Jim Bob hid it from them. How the fuck are you going to tell me to follow the rules of a contract and you won't even give me the contract? So that's what most of this book is about, is him having them sign this contract, which guarantees filming rights to everything, including births and any other traumatic event or whatever, for 5 years, for no pay. And he would not hand over these papers. And when he did, it was like 1 page. You tell me how that's doing right by your children and looking out for their best interest, because it's not. Jim Bob only cared about Jim Bob. I know we talked a lot of shit on Jill's dress when these photos came out, but it's cute. It's a cute little modest number, and I like the lace. She says, ironically, this family filming ministry, which emphasized putting your family first, was sucking the life out of ours. They also have this little, like, secret hand squeeze they do to show they love each other, which I thought was nice. Here she's just talking about how, you know, she still is under the authority of her family, and even though she's married, and it's just bullshit. She's talking about the different rules. They have to tell the producers first when they're pregnant, which is fucking crazy. And, like, yeah, I remember this specifically. They were like, we have to make sure that we air the pregnancy announcement. You know, we have to wait till your wedding episode airs because people will think that you're pregnant before you're married, which is so funny because it's like, yeah, there definitely were people who think that, like, TV is 100% reality and is caught up. And then, like, I think Jessa was courting before Jill, but they courted for, like, almost 2 years, I think, before they were married, which is, like, snail's pace to a fundamentalist. But Jill got married first and then got pregnant right away, so of course she was having a baby before Jessa. And they were, like, worried about, well, we got to air this first, and we got to make sure we, you know, announce it doesn't take away from Jessa's wedding. And I just thought that was interesting. Derrick's starting to raise, you know, red flags and being like, is this normal? Like, the way that you guys are announcing things, and, like, that we're not allowed to tell anybody, and that we have to keep it a secret. And, like, he's like, this isn't normal. Like, this is weird, right? And she's like, this is just how it is. Let's not rock the boat. Let's not stir up contention amongst the brethren. And then up here, this blue part. The blue part is James highlighting. I have the pink. I'm definitely not going to let them film the birth if they tried, because Anna kept getting taken advantage of. I mean, we've all seen the toilet birth thing. We should never have seen that. That is private moments for Anna. So then they go on a family trip to Central America for a mission trip. Missioncation, as we used to call it. Plus, most of them are already Catholic. But that's besides the point. So apparently they go on this mission trip with their family, and they meet this guy who's like, hey, we'd love to have you here, you know, and do a contract, do like 2 years down here. And they agree. And then that is kind of the catalyst for them leaving TLC, which we'll see in a minute. But I also thought it was funny. James highlighted that they made them play Mary and Joseph in the Nativity story, probably because she was pregnant. That's so funny. They're starting to argue with the producers and being like, we don't want anything filmed. And he's like, I can give you some handheld cameras. And she's like, no, nothing will be filmed. And he's like, you're going to film, right? So that was a part of it. And so I think they ended up doing phone footage, but still, it's so fucking stressful. She was in labor for several days. She keeps having these traumatic ass emergency C-sections. Like, leave her alone. She does not need to film this shit. For free, by the way. And they wouldn't even give her money for the copay. She had to pay out of pocket because she wasn't getting paid by Jim Bob to do this. She just didn't want to fight with her parents. She didn't want to fight with the crew. She's talking about the umbrella of protection and just how it affects her life. Over here, we're talking about IBLP, and then over here on this page, she's like, In Touch magazine called, they're going to release the police statement. And Jim Bob's like, don't worry, I'll take care of it. And he did not. She say, you know, her only relief was, you know, spending time with her baby, because he's the only one who hasn't been an asshole to her. Jessa and Jill were going to a doctor's appointment, and then Jim Bob called and said it's out. It's released. They start crying, which is very reasonable. They promised us secrecy. They said it was private, that it was a safe space. How could this happen? And she was saying, like, it was just being used for entertainment. I will say, I don't think people were using it as entertainment. I think they were very curious. But it was kind of like a spectacle, and I could see how she could view it as that. To have your horrible trauma be just out there for consumption, especially on a tabloid. And it's crazy because you know how people are. The fucking whole thing had been filled with redactions. It was full of, you know, marker covering things up. But people would, like, they would calculate the ages and you know, figure out who they were. Or they would be like, oh, this name is super short. It can only be this person. And it's just like, she's having nightmares. She clearly has PTSD. This is just like horrible. And it's like, this was supposed to be like a good time in her life. You know, newly married, new baby, like, but yeah, this is the people she keeps bringing up that she's going to, that she wants. These are the people on her shit list: Kathy O'Kelly, Ernest Kate, Rick Hoyt, and then In Touch magazine and its parent company Bauer. She's coming for their blood. She's saying she does hold Josh responsible, but she's mad at In Touch. I am clear about the mistakes that my parents have made over the years with our upbringing, especially Pops, but the way my parents handled or didn't handle things with Josh does not influence or justify the release of juvenile records and further re-traumatization and exploitation of innocent victims. Then she starts getting hounded by the paparazzi. They did something to her, which I'm now seeing is like a thing that paparazzi do, where they will drop a package off at their house, so they go and pick it up, and then they get photos of them. She's talking about Josh and his new job. Then we find out that she did Megyn Kelly because she felt super obligated. She felt super like she had to take care of the family, and like just like it was up to her to save the show. So she did Megyn Kelly, and apparently Josh was in the other side of the room on the couch, and he was making little comments and snickering. And then Michelle yells at him, and she goes, "Josh, it's not your fault that this was released, but you need to know that you were behind all of this. Don't be so arrogant." And he said, I'm sorry to you girls that y'all are having to go through this. That they're having to go through this. What would the this be in that context, Josh? Who is the reason that they had to do this in the first place? You should have kicked him to the fucking curb. He should not be in the room when this is happening. The world wants us to disappear, but we're going to stand strong. Stand strong. We stand with rapists. See, they were doing that before Mila and Ashton, weren't they? Ahead of the times. So she went to a professional counselor per recommendation. That's good to know. They were always there if we wanted to talk. I didn't want to talk about it. She thought it was old news. It's being brought back up. Yeah, Megyn Kelly. No need for Josh to appear. I think there's a little bit of a need. Because he definitely hid behind you. And I don't want... why is that not being addressed? Talks about the humiliation, the shame, the trauma... Josh said, thank you for doing this. You fucking baby. She said it was agony, so painful that I didn't really pause to ask why Josh was allowed to be there in the first place. So she acknowledges now, years later, that was really fucked up. And then they go to Central America to do their mission work. She said, the last thing I wanted was for people to be able to track us down. You know, it compromises the mission. It compromises their safety. It puts a target on their back. They're trying to help these people in their way. And... yeah, it just really wouldn't be helpful to have American paparazzi there, especially during this situation. Ashley Madison, shit, God. So they texted Josh, and he didn't reply. Her mom called, and she said, we're sending him away. We know that was Reformers Unanimous, which is also, I don't know if that's affiliated with IBLP, but it is religious. He said he's doing really well, and he works in the kitchen. Though I love my parents and it made a lot of sense that they would want to protect and care for their child, I couldn't help but think about the lengths that Pops had gone in order to guard Josh's privacy and keep him from being publicly humiliated. I mentioned this to Derrick, and he said that he had noticed the same thing. The feelings grew stronger within me, and by the time I went to bed, I felt sick to my core. Back when we'd sat in the cabin discussing the show, what I really wanted was for Pops to say, no, we're not going to put you on Fox News. I'm going to do everything I can to keep you girls out of this. We are not concerned about the future of our show anymore. I wanted my daddy to stand up for me in this way. And that is so heartbreaking. Because she's saying, yeah, this is not okay what he did. This is how I would reparent myself in this situation. I, as a woman, was expected to do all I could to protect Pops and Josh. Nobody appeared to see it differently. Then they bring back Jill and Jessica counting on. This part, he said, we cannot have Josh on the show, but we will show Anna. And then she's like, everybody stared at Anna. I felt for Anna. She'd been through so much already, and now it was going to get worse. I'm sorry that I'm wheezing so bad. This is unnecessary. So they start using Chad to do their fundraising, the same Chad, and he definitely screws them over several times. He ends up draining their bank account. And just like they trusted him, and he just destroyed that. Because he also was hounding them about the contract and stuff. Yeah, then somebody, a guard outside of where she was at is playing with a gun and shot it, and so they all freaked out and hid her in a closet, and She was very scared. So then eventually Derrick asks Jim Bob for some money, and since he's on the outside, he can kind of tell Jill that this is not okay and that she deserves to be paid for her work. Jim Bob just keeps changing the subject. He keeps being like, that's not a good idea. I don't think I'm going to do that. And he keeps just being so arrogant. And he's like, well, I help millions of people on my TV show more than you're helping people with your mission. Like, he is a prick. And he's basically like, no, we're not going to pay you. He said, I know y'all did some iPhone video or something for the pregnancy and birth stuff, and we appreciate all of that, but it takes teamwork. We all have to help out. Like, some of the kids are filming a lot in other areas of their lives, and at times some will be more involved than others, but it averages out in the long run. Then they have the famous conversation that we heard about in Shiny Happy People, where Derrick's like, what's the show worth? How much money do you have? Why aren't you paying us out? And he's like, how much do you want? And he's like, no, answer the question. So basically, they have this huge fight, and then Jim Bob eventually gives all the kids $80,000. And I know that Derrick thinks that is the amount that the kids would have been owed if they had been paid like $10 an hour for however many years. But it's bullshit, because they also find out how much each episode is worth, and how Jim Bob is hiding all of it. She talks about how in the Bible it says Jesus said that children should not be afraid to ask their father for bread. And Jim Bob's out here like trying to fucking itemize each thing that he's done for his kids. And it's like, you are so not biblical, dude. They had a friend who was a bodyguard. She said he used to be an MS-13, and then he got hunted down and murdered. Shit is crazy. This is where the contract stuff starts. So the contract that Jim Bob had them sign, tricked them into signing, basically signed their life away and said that they have all these obligations, including promotional shoots and photo shoots and filming births and everything like that. And it was for 5 years, and it was supposed to expire in 2018. They were told that it expires in 2019, which is also so insidious to make them do a whole nother free year of work. And they were terrified, because not only were they being lied to, this information was being hidden, but it really reflects in their homeschooling, because it's like Jim Bob knew that Jill wasn't going to read this contract and understand what it meant. Thank God Derrick had some sort of law and accounting background, because he was able to tell her that this was bullshit. The producer wanted them to come to America and do a photo shoot for the show. And they were like, we're not obligated to do that. What we do have is a contract to be missionaries for 2 years, and we can't just keep coming back and forth. And they're like, you have to. And Derrick's like, we're not obligated to. And he goes, yes, you are. And so that's when they had to call Jim Bob and be like, what contract? And he finally came clean, but he never once gave them the full fucking copy of the contract. And so they were terrified that they were going to be sued by Jim Bob, sued by TLC, or worse, lose their entire family over this. And then Jim Bob has the audacity to go, is this really Jill speaking, or is Derrick putting you up to this? It's not like you, sweet Jilly Muffin. How dare you try to manipulate her? If you don't come back for filming, everything's going to get messed up. We just got the show back up and running, and we need to be real careful not to rock the boat with the network. They can't film the promotional material for Jill and Jessa without you, Jill. Just think about it. If you don't come to shoot this, TLC will cancel the show, and everyone's going to know that it was your fault. Are you going to be okay carrying that burden? And then Derrick had to come in and be like, excuse me? Why the fuck are you talking to my wife like this? And so that's when they kind of, figured this out. And Jim Bob goes, you're gonna get sued, you're gonna need the money. That's so horrible. What kind of a fucking piece of shit? Then, so they're ducking the calls from TLC, because they're like, we literally cannot leave. And then guess who shows up in fucking Central America where they're at? But Jim Bob and Michelle with a camera crew. So they have to play nice. Yeah, Jim Bob kind of gives a half-hearted apology, but I don't count it because he goes ahead and is a dick again later in the book. So they said a few months later, we finally received a partial copy of the contract. Give me the full contract or I'm not doing shit. I am not obligated if I don't even know what the obligations are. How can you hold somebody to do something that they don't even know what it is? She says, with every conversation, with every meal, every moment that I braced for impact and didn't get chewed out by Pops, I could feel myself relaxing. That's indicative of her being yelled at her whole fucking life and having this trauma response when she's around him, and that very real, like, in your muscles, like, lock up frozen feeling. And she's talking about that. That doesn't happen by accident, okay? There's very deliberate abuse from Jim Bob here. So, in order to get this money, they had to sign a new contract, which was with Mad Family Inc., which Mad is Michelle Annette Duggar. And it was a contract with, like, Jim Bob's production company. So it wasn't with TLC, it was with them. But it had the craziest stipulations, like a lifetime NDA, filming access for unborn children, and all the other bullshit that they normally have to do, you know, all these different obligations. And it's kind of implied that maybe they would get some money from this, like, additionally, but it was not in the contract. But they would get $80,000 if they signed it. $80,000 that they were all owed, by the way, that they all earned. I would argue much more than that, since the show made millions of dollars. They allege that Jim Bob made $8 million, that they should have got more. Especially, like, you film somebody's birth, you better give them $1 million. I don't care. That is the most vulnerable moment of your life. And you film a child, ruining their digital footprint, making the entire public aware of what they look like, their medical issues, their entire personality, their entire lives. You owe them a lot of fucking money. You stole their childhood and exploited them throughout it. You owe them more money than $80,000. Derrick's like, you know, the trust has been shattered. We don't want to talk to you. And it just started this big thing. They couldn't get anybody local to take on their lawsuit, the one with all the daughters. So they said that Jeremy found a law firm in LA that they could use. So that's nice. And Jim Bob is like, I support you, but we got to be careful. We don't want to lose our show again. Sorry, she's trying to clean up your fucking mess. Then they were trying to join the International Mission Board. Not sure what the one was that they had been working with before. But to be employed with this International Mission Board, they had to do these long interviews. It takes several years. There's, like, qualifications and things. They were like, well, you need to cut ties with TLC because we can't have you running back and forth. And, you know, this is a very serious thing. And they're like, yeah, we'll quit the show and we'll let you know we're serious, you know. And they couldn't leave this contract, and they couldn't do what they needed to because they didn't have the contract. Jim Bob would not fucking give it to them. Before I forget here, I did want to talk about how Jill kind of addresses the transphobic tweets from Derrick. And she's like, he was tweeting about different topics and making enemies. And then even Jim Bob says, hey, be careful. If you've got problems, come to me. Jim Bob's wife, Michelle, famously recorded that robocall for a bill in Arkansas that was transphobic, you know. And even Jim Bob's like, hey, this is too far. So, yeah. Never forget. Never back down, never give up. Derrick, please stop being transphobic. Then maybe I'll stop talking about it, you know. So they emailed, it said they emailed Chad, and said that they wanted to leave and that, you know, their last date would be this date. And their phones just lit up after that. Everybody wanted to talk to them, try to convince them to stay. They were the cash cows. They were not going to let them go. They kept having to put the IMB off and kept putting them off. And finally they said, sorry, this is just taking too long. We, you know, and they were like, please just let us. And apparently, you know, the contract would have ended around the time that they would have got to go on the mission, but they didn't know that, so they couldn't tell them. And it's just really screwed up. She said that they did film exit interviews, but they didn't air them. Yeah. So there really was just no closure with the show. Okay, this is so crazy that I didn't even highlight anything. I was just reading it. This is about her birth trauma. She almost died. He had major problems. He had a stroke, the poor baby, but he's fine now. And yeah, she had a uterine rupture. She got cut into without anesthesia. It was just horrifying. And she talks about that. And then Jim Bob, like, charmed his way in because he wasn't supposed to be in there. There was, like, a short list of approved people. And he charmed his way in, and he came in. And the first thing he says is, a lot of people are asking about him. Holds up his phone. There's Chad saying, get me a picture of that baby. You sick fuck. Your daughter almost died. Your grandchild almost died, and that's what you care about. And then Derrick said, please do not ask other people for pictures of my children. It makes me uncomfortable. Then Chad goes, I didn't ask anybody for pictures of your children. I have no idea what you're talking about. Then she said Derrick went and hung out with the boys, her brothers, and she did not want to be filmed, and she just kind of sat on the porch and played with the baby, and she said that hearing Derrick's laughter was better than any painkiller she could have had. It was touch and go with the baby. And, you know, they weren't sure if he was going to have brain damage, and they were just really concerned about him, and they didn't want to tell anybody because they couldn't trust anybody in their damn family not to tell the fucking producers. So she said, at least until we knew more and could make a better decision, we were going to protect him. I was going to give Samuel what I didn't have myself when I was younger. Apparently, miraculous recovery. Baby was fine. Then she starts going to a different church. She makes friends with the moms there. She's got her little chosen family. She's finally got community. And she starts contrasting that with her upbringing in IBLP and just how fear-based and control-based it was, and how there was no actual Christianity in there. She's like, I love God, and I'm going to church, and you people fucked me up. She's talking to somebody somewhere, and she makes a comment to a friend who says, like, oh, how are you doing? And she's like, you know, everything's better. I'm healing, but I'm not sure if I can have more children. And she meant that in two ways. Physically, she wasn't sure if she could because she had a uterine rupture. And mentally, she was not sure if she wanted to go through that hell again. Especially now that she didn't need to. And she even said that she used birth control with Derrick between her last two pregnancies because the doctor recommended it. And I'm like, oh my God, Jill. She's telling her friend, she's like, I'm not sure if I can have any more kids. And Jim Bob goes, hey, we don't know that for sure now, do we? Then Jill says, I wanted to ask him why he thought he had the right to comment about my uterus. Okay, like, I never thought she would say that shit, but I'm like, oh my God, she's about to slap this man. If she doesn't, I'll do it for her. And then she's saying, like, you know, maybe trusting God is being happy with just having two. She had a miscarriage after this baby, but then she did have a full-term healthy pregnancy with her most recent. She's pregnant in Shiny Happy People, and she had her third baby, July of 2022. So he's a year old now. She's not going to call it this, but she definitely deconstructed quite a bit. She's wearing pants. She has piercings. She's going to, well, she said that Jim Bob called it a 2-kid church. It looks like it might be some sort of like non-denominational mega church maybe. And she's using birth control, and she still believes in God. That's deconstruction. That's what it looks like. It does not always have to end in atheism. And I just think that, you know, maybe she didn't have the words for it, or maybe she didn't feel comfortable being a part of that group, or she didn't want to fucking call it disentangled or whatever. But I definitely think that's what happened. A few times stories had leaked out about upcoming weddings or relationships, and we'd spend time trying to figure out who had leaked the info. I don't know who that could be. She says, at the time when I needed friendships the most, I realized that I didn't know how to talk to people. Sweet Jilly Muffin had been a gold star kid in the big house, but out in the world without any Duggars around, she was just a hollow, lonely, scared girl. I thought that was really, really profound of her to say. Then the pants thing. So I don't know who started wearing pants first. She says it was Ginger, but she starts questioning her line of beliefs. She said that she started questioning it after the initial reports about Bill Gothard came out. So that's nice. But she said, she's like, I've been thinking about wearing pants. What do you think? And Derrick's like, wear whatever you want. I don't care. And she's like, are you sure? Which is just so confusing, or would be confusing to her because she's being told that her husband is the boss. And I really like this, but a weird little side effect of a lot of this patriarchal bullshit and these like submissive head of household type, they don't want to make their wives submit. And when they do, it's like over dumb shit. So I thought that was really refreshing that these husbands let their wives wear pants, because it is ultimately up to the wife. But I just think it's really cool when they're like, can I wear pants? And they're like, wear whatever you want. I don't care. I'm not God. And so she's like, what do you think? You know, when we were told growing up that it's, you know, wearing men's clothing. And he says, I don't think so. He's like, men used to wear robes, which are basically dresses. And he's like, things are different. That's just not what those types of clothing mean anymore. Girls can wear pants. I think that men can wear dresses still, but I don't think Derrick agrees. And she's like, well, what about the fact that I know that it's wrong and I'm doing it anyway? That makes it a worse sin. And he's like, what kind of fucking shit are you talking about? He's like, it's a personal conviction. It's not a hard line sin issue. He's like, it's up to you. You can do whatever you want. And so she wore leggings as her first set of pants, which I also think is funny. It's like, way to jump into the deep end there. And she wore pants to Silver Dollar City. And it just so happened to be that her fucking family was there. And thank God there was no cameras, but they were still like overbearing, and she was like trying to hide from them all day. And eventually they met up, but she was like trying to hide that she was wearing pants. She was, covering her legs with a blanket. She was hiding behind hedges. And eventually they called her up and were like, I can't believe you're wearing pants. He basically did everything but slut shame her. And he would be like, I think you need to check out this book that Michelle read about modesty. Also, one last comment about this section. Apparently also Derrick had like one beer, and Jim Bob offered to send him to rehab over it. And then they had the gall to be like, Ginger called us and she told us that she, was changing her convictions. And it's like, why the fuck is my sister allowed to wear fucking pants and I'm not? I am a grown-ass woman with 2 children. She ends up doing more than that. She goes to a tattoo parlor, gets her nose pierced. She, she's a little rebellious person. This I thought was crazy that Jim Bob has Google alerts set up to monitor everything posted about the family. Makes me wonder, have I ever been a part of those Google alerts? I hope so. When she got her nose pierced, Jim Bob left a voicemail that was scathing and saying she's ruining her life and it's going to affect her little sisters. And, he's just so disappointed. And then he texted her, reminding her to honor her father and mother. She texted her family and said, honestly, I don't really feel like talking when I feel like there might be a chance that I'm going to be verbally abused, manipulated, and emotionally hurt. It makes me want to shy away from any type of conversation. I don't want our relationship to be this way, Daddy, and I know we aren't always going to agree on everything, but we won't want to ask for counsel if we feel like we aren't going to be heard, and you are only going to attack us and insist that your view is the way and we should see things too. We wouldn't ask you to agree, but only to listen. I love you, Daddy, and believe me, it hurts my heart to know that there would be any kind of disagreement. But life isn't a cookie cutter. There will be differences. I just want to have a good relationship with you and Mama and our siblings, even if we aren't on the same page with things. We know you still have littles in the house, and that creates a different dynamic that you have to look out for them. But we don't want to feel like you have to turn us against each other either. I know you will have to talk with them about differences and convictions like the nose ring thing, but I do feel like you have a lot of control over how they view us. We love y'all and all of our siblings and families and seek to honor the Lord and live in a right relationship with Him and fellow believers. We also recognize that differences can be hard for you too, Daddy. We want to be considerate of that too, and show that despite our differences, we still love and respect you. This is another bombshell moment. Derrick is saying that your dad's accountant has been telling the IRS that you've been receiving income from the show that you haven't actually been paid. What about the $80,000? Doesn't that cover it? Nope. As far as I can tell, over the last 10 years, income from Mad Family Inc. that you've declared to the IRS is way higher than that. How much? Derrick checked his spreadsheet. About $130,000 more. They emailed their dad's accountant, and he says, I didn't know about any of this. And it's just crazy because he was just relying on the fact that Jill was going to have her dad do her taxes, which is a reasonable thing to do, and he took advantage of her and stole money from her. I've talked to a lot of people who said, this might actually be legal. This might be some weird loophole, but it is definitely immoral and unethical. Then Jim Bob said that she had a spirit of ungratefulness. Yeah. I just can't believe this shit. They eventually went to have mediation, aka like have an outside party help them have this conversation, and they went to somebody in their church, which I don't think was a good idea because they didn't stop Jim Bob from yelling at her. And they had a list of things that they wanted to talk about. The contract that they signed that he wouldn't hand over, and the full amount that they were owed, $130,000. That all went out the window because they got into this huge fucking fight. So they're trying to bring up their issues, and Jim Bob turns it around on them, and he's like, I can't believe you're not going to say sorry for accusing me of these things and saying I verbally abused you. Like, of course he did that. Of course, instead of saying sorry for those things, he was like, how dare you accuse me of that? Well, how dare you do that thing? So another little bit of context here is that there was a girl outside of the church thing that they were at, who Jill was friends with, who had a nose ring, wore pants, tattoos, all that. And Jim Bob met her, said hi to her, took a video of her being like, I love the Duggars, and they're the reason why I became a Christian. And he showed Jill this at this meeting to be like, see, we're doing a good job and people love us. Why do you talk to this girl and respect this girl, but you treat me like shit for doing the same exact thing? He starts to get upset. And she goes, is it that you think I'm some kind of horrible person just because I wear pants and have a nose ring? And yet you see that girl outside and praise her? That's why I'm crying, Daddy. I'm evolving and changing just like that girl out there, but you can't see it. You treat me like I'm the prodigal who's turned her back on you. You treat me worse than my pedophile brother. And good God, if that's not a fucking mic drop. And Jim Bob goes, well. And then the mediator goes, I think we should take a break. I'm dying to know what the fuck Jim Bob was thinking he was going to say to get out of this situation. So she said it went on for another 3 hours. They all just screamed at each other and nobody got anything done. And then finally, the mediator said, you need professional help, which is like, bro, that's what you were supposed to be, you fucking useless. She says they went to a licensed Christian therapist, which we've been over this before. There are Christian therapists who are not actually therapists. They're just regular people off the street. That's the kind of people that Bethy goes to. And then there are people who happen to be licensed clinical therapists who are also Christian. But that's what she did here. She went to a real legitimate therapist who has education and credentials, who also just happens to be a Christian. Which I think, hey, that's the best of both worlds, right? So I would rather people go to therapy than not go. So if she's going to go to somebody with a Christian twist, that's probably best for her. For this therapist, because apparently he helped her really, really well. And that's all that matters, is that Jill got help, that she feels better, that she's healed, and that she knows how to properly communicate with her family. She said that the whole point was that she wanted to reconcile with her family, and he said, maybe that's not what we end up doing. Maybe you don't reconcile. Maybe we try to just get to some place where you can have peace. And they tried multiple times, and you can go no contact or low contact, and you can revoke it, or you can do it forever. And that's what he's trying to say. He's like, we'll tackle that, but we need to work on a lot of other things beforehand. It said that they tried to get financial assistance and they couldn't because, according to the government, they made all this money that they didn't really have. And then they get a text from the parents. Jill and Derrick, we love you both and want to see our differences resolved. I have been praying and fasting about all of this. I need to share my heart with you. I have made some bad decisions along life's way, and I have hurt you all. I am sorry about that. I was wrong for the things I have said and done, and I pray you will please forgive me. Then he goes, yes, we allotted at different times amounts to our children for tax purposes because each one of our children were benefiting from having all of their needs met. Food, clothing, shelter, utilities, music lessons, education, travel, instruments, vehicles, phones, medical insurance, medical bills. Here are some low numbers of what was approximately spent on Jill in the last few years. So then he goes, we paid for her apartment, her utilities, her midwife education, her car, her harp, her furniture. $15,000 harp. Bitch, she didn't ask to play the fucking harp. Anyway, just extremely disgusting when parents do this. You brought this child into the world. It is your responsibility to pay for that shit, and they don't owe you anything. Are you going to cut Grandma Duggar a fucking $1 million check for raising your ass? No, you're not. This is just a fucking manipulation tactic. This is financial abuse, and he knew that he could get away with this because she has no other fucking outlet. Yeah, it's nice that you paid for her rent, but I'm sure she would have rather have gotten a job and paid her own rent than ever have to live under your control. Jill, when Mom and I pass on, you are set to receive 1/19 of everything we own that is set up for you in a trust for you kids. If you attack us, probably your inheritance will be lowered significantly. I love you, but I am grieved by the disrespect and the accusations that continue. I have asked for forgiveness, and I hope that you will also. You have deeply offended your mother and I. We love you and forgive you for the things you have said and done. $20,000 is a one-time offer. Take it or leave it. Please let me know by Monday night, or the amount will be $0. Love, Daddy Duggar. Fucking scumbag. I can't believe this shit. Yeah. Burn it down, Jill. I'm tired of this. So finally, they hired a attorney to demand to have this contract, because how the fuck are you still keeping this contract from them? And so he started blowing up their phone, harassing them, saying, don't do this is wrong, blah, 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 blah. Then he sent the siblings after her, having them call her, text her, show up at her house, tell her that she's going to get sued. And they probably believed that because they're also under his control. And they didn't have backup jobs, so they had to rely on that $80,000 and that lifetime NDA. And Jill says this isn't my siblings' fault. They were just doing their best. They didn't want to sow contention among the brethren. But this is fucked up, a harassment campaign against your child. Because you won't give them the contract, and you know there was something fucked up in that contract, because why wouldn't you send it over? Yeah, one of her siblings came over and handed her a note that says, Pop says you've got 24 hours. And it was for $20,000, sign an NDA, we dropped this. Still not giving them the things that they demanded, that they deserved. So they just ignored him. They went to bed. And then in the middle of the night, it was midnight, Michelle stops by, drops off the contract in between her door, and sends her a text, which I thought was really sweet. It just reminds me of, when your dad's acting up and your mom has to be the bigger person. Now, I don't know if this was because she was afraid she was going to get sued, if she had, begged and pleaded to Jim Bob to please let me do this, or if this was her going rogue. I like to think that it was her going rogue and doing the right thing, but still, it was the deadline day. So they finally got the contract and got to pour over it. It talked about how much each episode is worth, especially the specials, the wedding and birth specials. $50,000 for each 1 hour episode, $65,000 for a double episode. And it would rise to $73,000 if the show had a fourth season, which we know it did. Pops later determined somehow that each child would receive 3% on their tax return each year. However, even this was a phantom payment, seemingly just reported on paper for tax purposes with no apparent intention to actually pay out this amount. We would later be told that this previously reported income was an investment or inheritance that we could only have access to upon my parents' death. We did the numbers. Over the years, there had been well over 300 shows, for which we estimated that TLC had paid Mad Family Inc. over $8 million total. Our wedding alone had netted well over $100,000 for Jim Bob, and her son's birth had been the focus of 2 special episodes, earning Pops another 6-figure sum. Yet when we'd asked him to cover our $10,000 deductible from having a baby, he pushed back. Yet over the years, Pops had bought more and more properties, and his fleet of private aircraft now contained multiple airplanes, including one with 10 seats. There was no denying that he was a generous man who had helped a lot of people, but it was also true that he'd grown rich off the show and had fought hard to keep that under wraps. Wasn't until January until things were resolved. We got some, but not all, of the Mad Family documents since they were missing some, and our attorney had spent weeks going back and forth negotiating the final settlement. We didn't sign an NDA or anything of that nature, and though we hadn't asked for what we felt was the true value of what I had provided to the show, at least it would help me recover what was owed to me that I had previously been reported on my taxes, plus attorney fees, as well as buy me out of my shares and future profits of Mad Family. Once I signed, I drove over to our attorney's office to collect a check, the first of 5 monthly installments, $175,000. You deserve more than that, girl. She said she started taking her kids to public school, which is a huge thing in their community. She felt lots of shame and guilt, but she wanted to do best for her kids. And it was definitely at the risk of her IBLP indoctrination. Then she had a little pina colada. It was great. She read a boundaries book that she felt helpful. And she also said she tried wine but didn't like it, which very, very similar. There's some wines that I'll put up with, but I'm a smoker, not a drinker. And Jim Bob texted her, this is in 2019, and he said, you can't come over to the house unless I'm there. And so she's like, well, guess I'm not coming over. She said she always felt like she was sinning, like she was guilty, like she was in trouble. She talks about how she still believes in God and she has faith, but she was afraid people were going to call her a backslider. Then Grandma Duggar died, and Jill went up to Jim Bob at the funeral, gave him a hug. And then she just wasn't sure if this was like a genuine moment, but she felt like it was. Then eventually Jim Bob relented and said, you can come over to the house just as long as you're not avoiding me, which is also like, I'll avoid you if I want to avoid you. Then Homeland Security started investigating Josh at his car lot. We all know now that he was looking at CSAM on the computer at the car lot, and they weren't talking to the family at that point. And so I saw on the news that the family had said, nobody's being investigated. And then a sibling texted her and said, no, we had a family meeting, and he told us that Homeland Security took a bunch of hard drives, but it was a setup, so don't worry about it. Homeland Security comes and interviews them, and they keep trying to ask her about Josh's original crimes, and she won't talk about it, which was a good thing because they ended up bringing that shit up in court. And she was like, I don't need this in the press again. I just did this 4 years ago. So good for her for standing strong. Then somebody from the Sun came over and she said, "Hello, Jill. I'm from the Sun. Do you know your brother's about to be arrested?" Yeah, and then he did get arrested, and they had the trial, and it was horrible, and it brought up a lot of shit for her. And she was originally on the short list of people to be witnesses in this trial, but they ended up not using her. And she went for one of the days, and then didn't go for the rest, and Derrick went for her, which was super nice. And then she said that the lawsuit ended up getting thrown out, and she thinks it's because of that it was the same judge that did Josh's case. I don't know if that's true, but I mean, she's allowed to think that. She did have to do a deposition for this lawsuit, and it was 7 hours, and she hated it. Then she talks about Jim Bob being belligerent in court, which is so funny because that was my section of Shiny Happy People. So I always think about that. And then, she felt justice was served, and he was finally behind bars. She said, "I felt sad too. Sad that Josh had become such a monster. Sad that even with all the chances Josh had been given to change, he had thrown them away as he continued down a dark, terrible road. Like the rest of the world, I was finally able to see my eldest brother for what he was. A man unable to control himself, totally detached from the reality of how deeply he was hurting others." She talks about missing her, innocent childhood before things went dark, and how she was tired of her family being a spectacle. Then she talks about just kind of the aftermath, how even now people come up to her and are like, "Your parents are really nice. You should give them a chance." Yeah, of course you would say that. She said, "The father whose child was engaged to be married to one of my siblings." Now, who could that be? "Had told me they wanted to hear my side of the story. He told me he didn't believe some of the things he had heard about Derrick and me, and he wanted to listen. We talked for 3 hours, and he said it helped him feel more confident about how he could support his child when they finally married into the Duggar family." This is where she's kind of like reflecting on her life, and she's saying, it wasn't child labor to build their house. It was fun. And we've already talked about that. It absolutely was child labor. You may have had fun. You were also being abused. That's the Duggar story right there. She's talking about how different things can coexist. Roses and thorns, justice and grace, beauty and pain. She talks about, she loves her parents and wishes that they could see the light, basically, because she misses them very deeply. And then kind of like the ending or conclusion of the book was that Jim Bob asked, not really, he kind of assumed that he was allowed to come over and hold the new baby. Then there's a picture of him and Michelle, the new baby. Kind of anticlimactic because he is not a good person. You don't have to forgive him. You're allowed to. If this is what brings you peace in your life, then I'm sure that's fine. But it's just kind of like, don't let him have this. He doesn't deserve to hold the baby. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I sure had fun. Is that the right word? I had something. But I'm sorry if you had to hear me wheezing and coughing and sniffing and all that stuff. I apologize deeply. I'm so sorry, but I had to get this episode out. Great book. I wouldn't call it a tell-all. I would call it a tell-some. It sure was. Definitely, if you need to pick it up, a lot of people are reading it at their local library. So if you don't want to give her money, which is reasonable, there was never a universe where I was not going to read this book. So that's far gone for me. But I do recommend it. If you have birth trauma or childhood sexual abuse trauma, maybe you would skip this one. But yeah, good shit. Love you guys. Thanks for watching. Tell me how you feel about the book in the comments. Remember to consensually smash that like and subscribe button. Check me out on social media. Check out my link tree. Keep an eye out for different things. I do have some projects coming up that I can't tell you about, but they're good. And yeah, follow me on Patreon or the YouTube channel membership for some fun extra stuff. Be nice, stay in school, wear sunscreen, drink water. Love you guys, and I'll see you next week for, I shit you not, another Duggar episode, but it was already planned before this book came out. So, I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye!